reviewing the literature. Right? Basically, literature review is an essential feature of academic research. It is a written appraisal of existing knowledge on a topic. Right? So basically, you have seen many articles, journal articles, papers, right? Case studies, research articles. So these represents the existing knowledge on a particular area, particular topic, right? So we need to gather all these publications, already published knowledge, right? Already published articles need to be collected, and the collection need to be reviewed. So which is known as existing knowledge appraisal, right? So all the published data or published research represents existing knowledge, current knowledge, right? So current knowledge need to be appraised, right? So that is known as literature review. Evaluate, in other words. Fundamentally, knowledge advancement must be built on a prior existing work. For example, you are going to do a research, right? What you are going to do in a research, right? What you are going to do? Basically, you are trying to find a new knowledge in a research, right? So you are trying to find a new knowledge. Always through a research, what you are going to do is to find a new knowledge, right? So in order to find the new knowledge, what you need to do is to review the existing knowledge. In the review, in reviewing the existing knowledge, what you need to find? Basically, you need to find the gaps. So what are the weaknesses in the existing area? What has not been addressed, right? Where are the gaps prevailing? Need to be identified. So that identification is done through reviewing the current knowledge, right? So then you must have a mechanism to review the current knowledge, right? So therefore, when in any case, when you are going to do a research, right? So doing research is meaning that you are going to create a new knowledge. You are going to create a new knowledge. So in order to create new knowledge, you need to appraise or evaluate, right? Or in other words, review the current knowledge, right? So current knowledge reviewing is generally known as literature review. By reviewing relevant literature, we understand the breadth and depth of existing body of work and identifying gaps to explore, right? So in the review, what you know is you simply understand the breadth and depth of the current knowledge, right? So by that analysis or by that review, you identify gaps, where to explore, what to explore, in which context you are going to explore, right? You are simply understanding. So then how you can do that is by for example, you collect all the data on a particular topic, all the publications on a particular topic, right? So let's see COVID-19, employee engagement in COVID-19. For example, I'm taking always example from human resource management area because I'm coming from human resource management, right? My discipline is human resource management, right? So you can take your area. You can take any topic from your area, right? So that is the current. You take all the publications. Let's say for the publication for this one, for the first article I showed you, I took all the publications published within last 50 years, up to from 1970 up to 2020, all the publications relating to gender stereotype change were taken into consideration for this review. So publications done during last 50 years was taken, right? So then I collected all these articles collected as a collection, and I analyze all the findings of these articles, for all these articles, right? While analyzing, I understood a pattern, I understood where a gap exists. What has been addressed commonly? What has been addressed very less? Where the gaps prevails? In which context? In which area gaps prevails? Right? So all done through softwares. Right? So likewise, you are supposed to do that in this method. Right? So you collect all these articles, then you summarize their findings, then you analyze, and while summarizing, after summarizing and analyzing, you synthesize uh, uh, all the findings, right? Highlighted in those publications. We can test a specific hypothesis even, right? So as you know that most of you are coming from academic backgrounds, so normally in a research study we test hypothesis, we collect the data, and we develop a conceptual model, or we develop a research question, research model, right? So research model is backed by some theories, or one theory or many theories, right? So so theory is then tested using hypothesis, right? So data is collected, and once the data is analyzed, then once the data results arrive, results be generated, then if the results are meeting the hypothesis, we normally accept the hypothesis, right? So normally we do these things in empirical studies and experimental designs, right? So but here for systematic literature reviews, you can test hypothesis, right? For systematic literature reviews, you can test hypothesis, right? So I will teach how to do that, right? But I'm not going to uh, uh, talk about that much, that particular hypothesis testing in detail in this course. That is basically done in meta-analysis, right? We are going to cover the bibliometric analysis, not the meta-analysis. When you are doing a meta-analysis, we can simply test hypothesis, right? But basically in a systematic literature review, basically consists of systematic literature review can be done through meta-analysis and the bibliometric analysis. In this course, I'm focusing to give you the knowledge and skills on bibliometric analysis, not the meta-analysis. We can do that in another course, right? Another certificate course. So but here, summarize, we collect all the articles, then summarize, analyze, and synthesize. Our main point is to synthesize, right? So I collected 50 years articles on gender stereotypes. Then I summarize them, I analyze them using softwares, and finally I synthesize the findings, right? So I made the model, simple model, what has been addressed commonly and what has not been addressed commonly were identified. And I directed some guidelines, I made some directions for future researchers to research through that, because basically I identified the gaps. So then when the gaps are identified, so gaps are the areas directed for the future researchers, right? So that's how we can do that through this method. We can also evaluate the validity and quality of existing work against the criterion to reveal weaknesses, inconsistencies, and contradictions, right? So we can basically test the validity of a previous work, whether it is valid, right? Or whether they have conducted quality work. For example, all the 50 years publications, methodological quality can be assessed, whether the methodologies they have followed are in good quality. What are the gaps relating to their methodologies they have followed, right? So basically we are identifying different types of gaps, right? Theoretical gaps, contextual gaps, empirical gaps, right? Author gaps, country gaps, contextual gaps. So various gaps can be identified, right? So quality levels can be identified, right? So against a different type of against a different type of criteria, right? Different weaknesses can be identified. So simply gap is a weakness, or weakness is a gap, right? Right. So basically, there are two forms of literature reviews according to the theory, right? Literally, there are two methods. One is background review, and the other one is standalone review, or in other words, a journal article. Normally, this is as I show you the first article. This one, this is an article, right? So this is an article. This is a literature review article. This is, in other words, standalone article. But it is reviewing a literature, current literature, right? Then, what is background review? Right? So background review is the second chapter of your thesis, your master thesis, your basic degree research dissertation, right? PhD thesis, right? Normally, when you are going to do a research, empirical study, the conceptual framework or the experiment you design obviously need to be backed by a particular theory, or backed by sound theoretical background, right? So for that, you do a review. So that is known as a background review, right? It is the literature review background section within a journal paper or a chapter in a graduate thesis, right? So normally we can produce a journal article as well. We can do a literature review, right? So for example, when you are doing a let's say on a particular topic, you can write a definition, you can write on that area, you can write definitions on that area, you can write dimensions on that area, you can write the what has address, what has not address. So kind of a background review, not a purely a systematic literature review. You do a simple background. You reveal a background of that study on that particular area, right? So as you know, the section synthesizes the extant literature and usually identifies the gaps in knowledge that is that the empirical study addresses. It may also provide a theoretical foundation for the proposed study, right? So basically, as you develop a conceptual framework for your research, for your master or PhD, right? So normally, what you do is that problem what do you call this? That conceptual framework is explained with the theory, right? So you simply, for example, let's say you have independent variable and dependent variable simply in a research. What you are going to do in a research conceptual framework normally. So we have X variable and we have Y variable. So you simply say that X dependent, Y is dependent on X. Y is a dependent variable and X is the independent variable. So basically you say that X is dependent on, Y is dependent on X. X causes to Y. In other words, X is a determinant for Y, or X is a factor for Y, right? So in that case, you are going to propose this in your research. For example, simply we can say, in that case, you need to set a hypothesis, develop a hypothesis for that in order to test this, right? By collecting data. So when you are going to develop a hypothesis, you need to simply find a theory supporting this impact or supporting this causal relationship, right? So then you need to define this variable. You need to define this variable. You need to find theories. You need to find prior research studies tested relating to this impact or relationship, right? So you need to mention all this in a background review. So basically, in a background review, you basically focusing on definitions of study variables, and theories relating to the study variable. And the third one is prior research studies relating to the study variables, right? What you are going to study in your master thesis or in your PhD, right? So that is known as a background review. Basically, three things are highlighted: definitions, theories relating to your proposed model, and the prior research studies, right? So that's the background you are providing in the second chapter in your research. And the second one is the standalone piece or standalone journal article. This review attempts to make sense of existing literature through the aggregation, interpretation, explanation, or integration of existing research, right? So that is basically representing the systematic literature review, right? Literature review chapter or literature review article. The standalone literature review can be categorized by the purpose of for the review, which needs to be determined before any work is done, right? So then now, for example, you are going to do a PhD, right? Are you going to do a, let's say you are now in the process of preparing your proposal, right? So now you have, let's say you have already done the PhD. Now you are, for your professional career, you are a researcher, let's say, right? So you are right. You are going to do a professional research relating to your professional area, relating to your specialization. And you are going to have a funding as well for the research from international donor or funding agency, let's say IMF or let's say WHO, right? Mass scale research you are going to be done, right? So now you are now in the proposal designing stage, preparation stage, right? Are you going to do a standalone research article, standalone literature review or background literature review? Which one you prefer best? I'm asking from you.
Standalone piece of research, yes. I hope.
You need to do a standalone piece. You need to review the entire literature prevailing relating to your area of study, as I did before my PhD proposal prepared. Right, I took 50 years publications on gender stereotype change. Right, so then I identified where the gaps prevails. Right, what has not been addressed, what has commonly addressed, what were the areas the researchers commonly interested with, right? So I understood, I identified, right? So then simply I took an area which is not addressed by the researchers. I selected as a result of this standalone review, right? So that's what you are expected. Right, so before any research study going to be started, right, you came, let's say you got a research idea, just you got a research idea, right? So in that case, at the very first, what you need to do is you are supposed to do a standalone review, right? So therefore, there are different types of standalone reviews. We have normally people use traditional methods and systematic methods, right? So those two basic forms are there. In the traditional, as you see there, when you go through the literature, when you go through different articles, right? So different people have used different styles, various variety of styles. When you search, for example, when you search Google literature reviews, type the literature reviews on something on a particular topic, right? You find various articles, various types of formats, right? No defined methods followed, no standard method followed, no specified analysis even followed, right? So basically researchers, authors have used subjective methodologies, subjective guidelines, and subjective narratives reviews, right? So, but when it comes to a systematic literature review, you can't do that, right? So systematic, as the name implies, systematic review must be systematic. Systematic literature review must be on logical base. Systematic literature review must be on maybe quantitative, must be based on mathematical quantitative techniques, must be scientific, in other words, must be scientific, right? So rigorous methods must be followed. Structured approach is there. So normally internationally commonly accepted method for systematic literature review is the PRISMA, right? PRISMA. We follow the PRISMA framework, right? Normally, different mathematical analytical techniques must be used. Normally, we are using bibliometric analysis and meta-analysis, right? So they are really 100% quantitative, mathematical, scientific, right? So now you can understand what the systematic literature review is, right? So there are different types of literature reviews, as I told you, right? Poetry in review, meta-analysis, quantitative, narrative, and also we have systematic literature review, qualitative ones, right? So we have systematic literature review quantitative and systematic literature review qualitative. We are talking about systematic literature review quantitative, not the qualitative. So when it comes to qualitative, so you can follow narrative reviews, variety of styles, right? So there are some features, systematic features, but the author is free to use different judgmental analysis. Follow the judgmental analysis. Use the judgmental analysis in the analysis, right? But here, quantitative systematic literature reviews, you are supposed to follow a standard method, structured approach, rigorous methods, and quantitative scientific methods for analysis, right? And different types of analysis are there. And so SLR, ideally systematic review should be conducted before empirical research, as I told you, right? So before your research, original research study, before your experimental design, before your empirical research, right? What is empirical research? Empirical research is quantitative, based on a large sample, or based on experimental designs, based on scientific rationality. You do the research. You are going to test a hypothesis through by collecting a large sample, by collecting the data through a large sample, right? Clinical test, for example. So before that, you need to do a systematic literature review. In other words, literature review by following systematic methodologies. So it's a subset of literature from the systematic review that is closely related to the empirical work, can be used as a background review. In that sense, good standalone reviews could help improve the quality of the background reviews, right? So basically, as a form of a background review, you can do a systematic literature review. But systematic background review can be done as a form of a standalone review. Clear? Which means that you are going to produce a separate article for that, right? So systematic literature review is then a review that strives to comprehensively. What is the meaning of then systematic literature review? A review that strives to comprehensively identify, appraise, and synthesize all the relevant studies on a given topic, right? All the relevant studies on a given topic. I took 50 years publications, right? 50 years publications on gender stereotype change, right? So comprehensively identify, then appraise and synthesize the findings on a particular topic. So systematic reviews are often used to test just a single hypothesis or a series of related hypotheses, right? Especially, we are not going to use hypothesis to be tested in the bibliometric analysis that is supposed to be done at the meta-analysis, right? So hypothesis testing is highly recommended at the meta-analysis because hypothesis testing is really mathematical, really quantitative. Right. No. So I have a question from you. For standalone review, is there a time limit for 50 years? No. No. So I was talking about what I did, right? So you are free to take any year range, but you must have a strong justification, right? Because when you are going to publish your article in a journal reviewers, especially when it comes to high-end, top-end, highly indexed journals, reviewers may raise different types of questions. Why you took this? Why you selected this methodology? Why you took this this year range? What is the reason for that? Right? So then you must have clear-cut answers for that, justifications. Right? So because I took 50 years, there was no study conducted during the 50 years. Right? So I wanted to know just because I wanted to take 1970 as the started year because literature says that gender stereotype was started to change after 1970s from the countries around the world. Right? So starting year was the 70s. Then I wanted to study the pattern. What type of pattern was there in the gender stereotype change during the last 50 years? Right? I took the starting year as the base year. Right? So sometimes some other researcher wanted to study the last 5 years pattern. So you must have a clear-cut justification for that. Right? So when it comes to last year, when it comes to the latest publication I did, as I showed you, this one, right? SEMDPI. When it comes to this, here I took the COVID period, employee engagement management in the COVID-19 pandemic. Right? So then obviously I took last 2 years, 19, 20 and 22 period. Duration is 2-year period because I'm taking the COVID-19 pandemic, the employee engagement practices during COVID-19 pandemic. Right? So that's depending on your research question, research objectives. So there is no rule for taking 50 years. Right. Another question. In a standalone SLR, is the second chapter a conventional background review of literature? No. Right? In a standalone SLR, is the second chapter a conventional background review of literature? Yes, yes. Right? So second chapter is a kind of a, let's say, for example, you are going to study a particular model. X is a cause for Y. So then what you need to write? Because you need to write the definitions. Right? You need to write the research, let's say theories, supporting, underpinning that relationship. X is a cause for the Y, for example. And you need to write the prior research studies. Prior research studies supporting the hypothesis you develop, because without hypothesis, you can't test the model, right? Mathematically. So in order to develop hypothesis, you need to at least provide theoretical justifications for that impact. X impacts Y on Y. Right? So for that, you use theories and you use prior research studies. Right? So those three informations need to be written in the background review. But when it comes to, let's say, why you took 2 variables for your study. So one might question that from you. Why you took these two variables to study, investigate? Then you must have a standalone review. Right? You must have identified this X impacts Y relationship has not been addressed in the literature previously. There is a gap. You are going to fill that gap. So that is standalone review is highly relevant for problem justification. Problem justification, right? Highly relevant for problem justification, but the information you gathered through the standalone review need to be used for the background review as well to write the second chapter. You can find the definitions from the standalone review because you are reviewing entire research during the past 50 years, for example. Because you go through the whole articles, then through those articles you can find the related theories. You can find related theories. You can find related definitions. You can develop the questionnaire. Right? Because you are referring those articles. So that's what highlighted here. That you can take information for writing your second chapter when you are doing a standalone review. So most important thing is before going to do a research study, you must do a standalone review. Right? That review will ultimately help you to write the second chapter of your study. Not only the second chapter, first chapter as well. Problem can be clearly defined. Research problem can be clearly defined. Right? Justified because you understood, you have understood the gaps through the standalone review. Clear? Got the point? Right. So a systematic review is a review of a clearly formulated question, right? So systematic review must be dependent on formulated question. You must have a research question first, right? So you must have a research idea, research question first, and depending on that, you can do a systematic literature review, right? So these days I am sharing my expertise to various people coming from different parts of the world. I'm consulting. There is a group, research group, famous research group, Impact Factor Group in UK, representing nearly 35 university senior lecturers in UK, senior lecturers and professor level academics in UK. So one Sri Lankan is there, and he contacted me and asked me to my willingness, my consent to join to their group for consulting, because they are doing a systematic literature review on entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial tools or something, entrepreneurial intention tools, right? So so then they asked me to join because they are not in a position, they don't have the awareness of doing this systematic literature review. Then I normally, once I published an article, normally I post the article through the Facebook or through the social media. Then once the notification is published, so many invitations coming from different parts of the world. So as a result of that, so that Sri Lankan contacted me and asked me my consent to join to their group. Then I joined, happily joined to their group. Now I am consulting to them on writing a systematic literature review on their specific research areas. So at the last time meeting, one question about me, since I am coming from HRM, one colleague, UK fellow, asked me about what is metaverse, right? So metaverse, you may have heard about it, known about it. Metaverse is the latest development in the internet and the virtual reality, augmented reality. So that can be applied in applied for human resource management. So then at that time I was never known about that concept or anything about that, right? I didn't know anything about that. So then I simply said, let's do a systematic literature review on that, right? So then let's do a review on that. So then by reviewing, simply we can understand what the meaning of it, what are the definitions, and what are the research areas, what has been addressed, what has not been addressed. So basically we can do a standalone review. Basically we can find information for a background review even. Clear? So, so you must have a research questions. What do you mean by, for example, what you know about metaverse? What is metaverse? So then that is your research question. What has been addressed in the metaverse or application of metaverse in human resource management? Or application of metaverse in medicine, especially medical training, skill training, right? Metaverse is highly applied for the let's say surgeries, right? 3D modulation. So doctors can be trained, medical students can be trained, easily can be trained through augmented realities, right? So training can be done through simulated models, right? Gamifications can be done, right? So those are really helpful for the HR, human resources, training and development, learning and development, human development, all these things coming under that, right? So this type of learning, right? Training courses, health and safety demonstrations, all can be done through augmented realities, that is known as metaverse, right? So so once you get an idea, or once you came across a particular area, so then if you need to find out more information on that, if you are really interested with researching on that area, so obviously you can do a review through following this methodology, right? So statistical methods may or may not be used to analyze and summarize the results of the included studies, right? So obviously we are supposed to use statistical methods, meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, even that is supposed to be done. So we are used here. We are going to use here in this particular course bibliometric analysis, not the meta-analysis. Meta-analysis purely mathematics, right? Meta-analysis purely mathematics, so that can be done in another course. So meta-analysis is a kind of analysis done in the systematic literature reviews, right? So that is coming under the purview of systematic literature reviews, a kind of a analysis, right? So that is purely statistical methods, but bibliometric analysis is a uses some sort of statistical methods. So that is in bibliometric analysis, statistical rationality behind that. So right, so in that's why we are saying that it is purely quantitative, purely mathematical.